Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this meeting. And I would like to remind that meeting is organized in the series of meetings within the project Identifying and Countering Holocaust Distortions, Lessons for and from Southeast Asia, organized by the Never Again Association in cooperation in and with support of International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, Henrik Böll Stiftung Cambodia. And this particular meeting today is also organized in cooperation with the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Moscow. And this meeting will be recorded, and we kindly ask you to stay muted during the presentation and post your comments and questions in the chat. I'm very happy to have also my two colleagues today with me who are helping to moderate the event. And this is Alona Fomenko. She is from the Research Center of a Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Moscow. And this is Sayana Sar from the Peace Institute in Cambodia. So welcome to both of them, and thank you for organizing this event with me today. This is our third meeting in the series, and last month we had a discussion with Sarah Lombard, for example, a digital curator at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, who presented us an exhibition, digital exhibition about Rohingya genocide. And the recording is available online, so you can watch this presentation. We were supposed to have 6 speakers today. Unfortunately, our colleague from Thailand, Patporn Aur Phutthong, who is doing very important projects in Thailand in the Deep South, where there is a conflict. She's preparing a new museum and also a museum about 1976 massacre in Thailand. Unfortunately, she had an emergency situation this morning. She sent her presentation yesterday night, but she couldn't join us today. But we will try to prepare another meeting in November, and we hope she will be presenting her project there. So we welcome to all our 5 speakers today, and welcome to Tali Nates of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. She is also a chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and historian who lectures internationally on the Holocaust education and reconciliation and genocide prevention. And we are very honored also to have Mr. Mofidul Hoque, who is one of the founder trustees of the Bangladeshi Liberation War Museum. And he's also the director of a Center for Study of Genocide and Justice of the Museum. And we have also 2 excellent speakers from Cambodia. And we have Soth Plai Ngarm, visionary founder of the Cambodia Peace Museum, Peace Gallery in Battambang, and Khet Long, the founder of the Youth for Peace in Cambodia, and one of the leading peace builders in Cambodia. And also welcome to a speaker from Russia who works at 2 museums, at the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Moscow and GULAG Museum, which is also raising very difficult issues in Russia, and also probably the museum also. And she will share her personal experience as an educator, as a guide who is interacting with various visitors. And Anastasia Deka. So welcome to all speakers, and each speaker will have 10-12 minutes for presentation, and afterwards we will have 2 rounds of questions for speakers, and then we will have discussion. So please leave all your questions in the chat, so and then we can ask our presenters to answer these questions. So, and I would like also now to give the floor to my colleague, to Alona Fomenko from the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Moscow, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. You, I suppose, perfectly told what we are going to do today. From me, I just say a few words how I'm involved in this project. As Natalia told, I work at Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Research Center. So I usually deal with the main exhibition, the core exhibition of our museum, which is very historical and says about the history of Russian Jews, which is very complicated. And also I worked as a guide, an educator and mythologist. So also work with people who have questions. And this spring, we had a very interesting lecture with Natalia, who told us more or less about the difficult topics in Asian histories. And it was a great challenge for us to understand how difficultly from the first side, people deal with these questions, but at the second view, we understand that these processes are more or less the same, just it's like different period for each of us, how we face these questions. So now I'm very glad to start this interesting discussion and invite for the floor Tali Nates, who will tell us more professionally than I did about global challenges for Holocaust memory and how can museums and memorial sites confront denial and distortion of history. Please.
Thank you so much. It's so great to join you all from Johannesburg, from South Africa. And of course, this is a huge topic. So what I thought to do is to present to you some aspects that will open the discussion. And during the discussion and question time, we will unpack some of them and maybe open some others. I will start with my PowerPoint. So 1 second, and hopefully you can see it. Is it okay? Great. So we're nearing, of course, 80 years after the Holocaust, where the words never again were used for the first time. But of course, genocides happen again and again, from Cambodia to Rwanda, from Srebrenica to Myanmar. So the words of Auschwitz survivor and author Primo Levi that greets visitors in our center, and this is a picture of our sort of foyer as you come into our center, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, are really critical. And we all should reflect on them deeply. And he said, it happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere. So what do museums do, and how do they call the challenge of the never again? How do we respond to the challenge of the assault on truth? How do we respond to issues of distortion and denial in the museum? The latest 2020 surveys show that museums are highly trusted sources of information. History museums are even more trusted than art museums, or more trusted than zoos and aquariums and other things. It's bizarre, but they are really, really trusted source of information. Of course, much more trusted than the news agencies, the newspapers, and so on. In a world where there is an assault on truth, where nationalism and populism is growing, this is an important role for museums and memorials as well, of course, not only to remember, to honor the memory, and to educate about our case studies of history of genocide or the Holocaust, but we need to use our trust that is given to us very wisely, and we cannot abuse it. And that is really important, and where I would like to start. Now, many countries draw on the memory of the Holocaust and other genocides to promote human rights. In a 2009 report of UNESCO, they identified various reasons to teach about the Holocaust in nations such as those in sub-Saharan Africa, where I come from, that were only marginally impacted by the history of that Holocaust. And you can read the full report by Barry van Driel that was published in 2016 online. The report further highlighted the importance of learning about racism and prejudice, the fragility of democracy, and it also stressed the promotion of critical thinking and deliberation. And these are, again, themes that we need to speak about and unpack more today. Many challenges exist, of course, including the passing of survivors of the Holocaust. That generation is aging. They are in the 80s, 90s, and 100s. And they were the witnesses of the atrocities. And of course, for many years, they played an important role in sharing their painful memories with students and playing an active role in the education programs of so many museums around the world. Not only Holocaust survivors, Cambodian survivors, Rwandan survivors, and so on, play a hugely important role as the witnesses. Memorials and museums have to develop different tools, including films, resources, books, and for example, I'll just mention the new dimensions in a testimony developed by the USC Shoah Foundation, where you can actually talk to survivors that are answering questions that are asked by an audience using latest technology. By the way, I'm not doing the lines, so what I'll do is I'll close my presentation just in case there is a problem, and I will open it again. I'm sure that you all see the lines. I'm not doing those lines. So let me just restart. Can you see the slide now without the lines? Thank you. So, for example, this is a publication that the 3 Holocaust and Genocide Centers in South Africa, Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg did. There is volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1 is portraits of 45 Holocaust survivors that settled in South Africa. And volume 2 is Rwandan survivors, Tutsi survivors who settled in South Africa, and it is their stories. So really, our role in society is to pay attention and listen to the stories and warnings of the survivors we meet. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. So the witnesses who we listen to, all of us, and the people that are visiting our museums and institutions for many years, were the ones that we need to share their stories, going forward. I'm calling it paying it forward, in a way. So those stories that we heard, we need to tell forward. So how is the Holocaust remembered in countries that were on the margins of this history? And that is important for our Asian colleagues, for African colleagues, and for others that are listening, not from Europe or not from the United States, but from other countries that were marginally impacted by this history of the Second World War and the Holocaust. And can it act as an entry point to make commemoration and connections to issues society is dealing with in your countries, in our countries? So I'm going to give you 2 case studies, 2 very quick case studies. One is from Mauritius, the island of Mauritius that you always think as a paradise, coconut trees, you come to the beach, and what does that have to do with the Holocaust? I will tell you that very quickly, this story, and then the story of Johannesburg. And I would like to look at the Holocaust in Africa, because Mauritius is also part of the African continent for a few moments, because the Second World War and the Holocaust took place also in Africa. Yes, on the margins of Africa, but it took place in Africa. For example, internment camps, I don't have time to talk about it, but internment and forced labor camps were established in North Africa, many of them, and also in West Africa. The Vichy government established concentration camps in Senegal, in Sébikotane, and in Niger. We have a lot to research, we have a lot to share about it. But in going to Mauritius in December of 1940, 1,580 Jewish refugees from Germany, from Austria, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, from Danzig, were deported by the British colonial power to their colony in Mauritius. They were imprisoned in a prison camp called Babasan. The men were separated from the women and children, and they were there for almost 5 years in the Babasan prison camp until liberation in August of 1945. They were kept as aliens, citizens of an enemy state, and 126 of them died during their captivity and are buried in this cemetery, the St. Martin Jewish cemetery on the island. They died from malaria, from typhus, some committed suicide, some children died at birth, and so on. And in 2014, a small information center, the Babasan Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center, opened in Mauritius near the Jewish cemetery. Now, until 2014, this history was forgotten. So it's beyond distortion, it's beyond denial. The history was just not remembered. It did not become part of the history of the island, even though it is the history of the island. It's colonial history of the island. And it's the closest the Second World War came to Africa in a way, to Southern Africa in a way. So this history that was forgotten is now playing an important part for visitors of the memorial, including many students, and it's retrieving a history that was almost lost. So this is one case study that I would like us to reflect on. The other case study that I quickly want to look at is the case study of our center, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. This picture was taken in 2016 when we moved into the new building, but we really opened officially in March of 2019. Now, in South Africa, the subject of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust became a compulsory one in 2007 for grade 9 learners and those that choose history for their matriculation exams, again in grade 11. And it is including the Holocaust and genocide in a national curriculum, which is my next point. So this is really important. If you want to fight denial, if you want to fight distortion, it is important that you learn about it, that you know the history. So if it is included in the curriculum, if there are spaces in the memorial and museums for training of teachers to teach about the subject, to create reliable resources to support this teaching, and to make sure that there are departments at university level that also teach and research about this crucial history. And not only Holocaust, but genocide as well. So at a university level, you need that support as well. And this is crucial if you want to fight denial and distortion, because you cannot win without knowledge, without real information, without real research, without archives, without libraries, and without support of those that need to know the truth. So developments of museums and memorials, like the ones developed in South Africa, the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Centre, the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and this, the newest one, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, is an important source for education and memory in our country. I'm looking at the time, and I'll just end maybe by showing you some images from the museum and show you how in the museum, if a museum is a trustworthy source of information, how do you show that trustworthy information? And what we did, and you can see that in one of the spaces, is to use artifacts, to use testimonies, to use quotes, to use films, to use music and art, and to try and also make connections to other case studies. So in this space, for example, we make connections to the refugee crisis, because also in South Africa, we have refugees, asylum seekers, migrants from other countries, and xenophobia and Afrophobia is growing. I'll speak about it more in the question and answer part. We also use testimonies of survivors that brought their artifacts to the museum, and we are using the late Veronica Phillips. She passed away in February. She was a Hungarian survivor of 4 concentration camps from Budapest, gave us her childhood doll. And you tell the story through the artifacts. Sylvester Sendakieye, a child survivor, 12 years old from Rwanda, that lost all his family, a part of 2 of his brothers, is telling the story of his shoes, his childhood shoes, and how he survived. This is very, very important. And finally, you take the exhibitions into temporary exhibitions. You create temporary exhibitions that can, in a way, serve countries that cannot open a museum. There are countries that cannot, they cannot open a museum. So we have to support regional information, even continental information sharing. So we have a program called the Changemakers Program from South Africa and Rwanda that is now in 12 countries in Africa. And this is an example of the exhibition in Nigeria in 2018, in the north of Nigeria, where Boko Haram is attacking many villages, and extremism is rising. This is an example of teaching about the Holocaust in Rwanda, of course, a country that is dealing with their own past and their own history, but bringing the 2 case studies together and actually bringing other case studies together, like Cambodia or like Armenia, is making the fight against extremism, denial, and distortion much closer and much easier to home. So finally, learning about the Holocaust and genocide and how it relates to contemporary human rights issues can help us see how prejudice, discrimination, and othering leads to mass atrocities and genocide by emphasizing the importance of empathy, critical thinking, and also personal responsibility to know the truth, to find out about the truth. We can become active voice against hate speech, against human rights violation, against denial of all genocides, and we can work towards preventing future genocides. And you see in these pictures an image from the end of our exhibition. We have a photo of these 2 survivors, both volunteers at our center. Irene Klaas, born in Lodz, Łódź, survived the Warsaw Ghetto, and Sylvester Sendakieye, that you met before. And as you can see, Irene again bring the motif of the never again that I started with. I thought that when the world learned what had happened to us, it could never happen again, but it did. And of course, Sylvester said, and a genocide happened yet again to us here in Rwanda in full view of the world. And that never again was not their reality. But can we, in the museum world, in the memorial world, in the education world, become these activists for change that never again will be a reality? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tali. It's an excellent presentation and very compact. I think that we all had something new to learn. And after all the other stories, we'll have some time to ask questions, which I'm sure we already have. And now I want to introduce our next speaker, Soth Plai Ngarm from Cambodian Peace Gallery. And actually, it will be another great story. Please.
Thank you very much. I not prepared to speak too long, but I'm looking forward for more discussion. I have prepared a little bit of my my story and the gallery background. But before I start, I would like to thank the organizer for this opportunity to share about the Peace gallery, Cambodia Peace Gallery. The story about Cold War, the Khmer Rouge, and genocide in Cambodia is less likely unheard of globally. Cambodia Peace Gallery was founded from authentic experience of suffering, trauma, and painful memory. I myself grew up in a miserable Cold War, the Khmer Rouge regime, and one of the worst genocide in human history. I took part in the Civil War as a child soldier, and 27 years after Cambodia emerged from the war, we successfully founded the Cambodia Peace Gallery with a vision motivated by a strong desire to understand the suffering and the pain we endure. We want to name it as the Cambodia Peace Museum. Instead, we registered as the Peace Gallery under the Center for Peace and Conflict Study, CPCS, because of government criteria and the limitation that we faced. I would agree that victims of genocide and crime against humanity were eventually facing more or less the same fate anywhere in the world. However, each situation is unique to how it come about in a very respective context. Cambodia also had its own unique stories and history that progressed into the atrocity we experienced. We do not have a clear-cut relationship between the perpetrator and the victims. Still, one was the others at different times. Structural violence and social injustice have been so crippling Cambodian society for so long. Throughout our history, it has become the time bomb that exploded into the open during the Cold War and expressed its rage, hate, revenge by those who saw themselves as the victors. For Cambodia to learn from the past is not just to look at the genocide and the atrocity, because all were only the result of the other mistakes that we ourselves made and contributed to the fatal circumstances of the history in recent history, to the society in recent history. The approach of Cambodia Peace Gallery is deeply grounded in Cambodian experiences and cultural perspective. It is committed to understand, not blaming. The gallery offers multiple perspectives of the conflict and approaches to ending the conflict. It is to illustrate how decisions were made, such as how government and the resistance group engage in peace process. The Cambodia Peace Gallery emphasizes continued learning, understanding that at no point in any exhibition or story in the museum be complete. Exhibits continue to add voice, perspective, and reflection, striving for a holistic presentation of Cambodia's journey. Thus, we appreciate the effort and support in identifying the guilt through the hybrid court to trial some Khmer Rouge leaders. We also see the importance of learning from past mistakes to prevent similar atrocities from happening again in the future. To prevent genocide and crime against humanity, we need to do both, not either or. Punish the guilty and continue to improve human peace cognitively. As part of the ongoing development of the Peace Gallery, we also adopt the concept of positive nationalism. I understand that the word nationalism is have very bad kind of connotations in some contexts, but I'm willing to discuss more if the audience interested about what we mean by positive nationalism. But we would like to promote that in Cambodia in our Peace Gallery, because we have a reason to do that. And another concept that we also adopt is the intergenerational reconciliation. It means that the reconciliation across generations, because we believe that in one generation we cannot have a true reconciliation, because the older generation is already conditioned in a way that we cannot realize any true reconciliation. We always have the memories that it's not allow us to really have reached the true reconciliation. And we may know that through reconciliation need time. For Cambodia, it is only possible to by expanding it across the generation. Goal of the Peace Gallery is to contribute to culture of peace, where people have a deeper understanding of conflict and make choices that support positive futures. The Peace Gallery is a space for people with very different experiences of Cambodian history to reconcile the memory of the past and to share their hopes for the future. Engaging exhibits trace the causes and impact of conflict and emphasize the peace and reconciliation effort during and after the war, with example of individual and group contributed to peace. It includes gallery and reflection space, classroom and educational programs, and conference spaces. Audience that we target, the Peace Gallery give priority audience to Cambodian, especially young people and university students. It designed a peace education program in partnership with universities and hosts a range of innovative learning activity to engage young people. Beyond Cambodian audience, the gallery is also designed for people who work on conflict to learn from peace building experience, and for the public who is interested to learn insight from the exhibition available at the galleries. We also in the museum we have some short history of conflict for Cambodia, but most of exhibition is more kind of compilation of the positive narrative that we have see that it's really important that a museum to depict that positive narrative as well, and also at the same time allow young people to do research by themselves. Teaching history for us is really challenging, and so that's why we want to have the intergenerational reconciliation, because when young people that can do research and learn about the history and come together, and they can write their own histories. It's not dictated by the old generation, which already conditioned that we have pain and we have traumas that is always with us as the old generation until we die. And so to recognize that is really important, that we should liberate that from a young generation, to have them decide for the future what is the collective history at that part that we miss look like. And so we want that our Peace Gallery to play that role in terms of kind of collecting resource for young people to explore and learn and do dialogue. And one day they will be able to manage to make to bridge the missing history that we right now challenging to have a real curriculum for the this education system in Cambodia. I would like to stop now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for presenting Peace Gallery in Cambodia, in Battambang. I think it's a very important place for Cambodia, and I'm sure that we will have many questions and we can discuss it later. Thank you so much. And now I would like also to ask my colleague Sayana Sir to present the next speaker from Cambodia.
Thank you, Natalie.
Okay.
So our next speaker is Mr. Khet Long, and I would like to introduce him here because I have the honor to introduce him. We have been know each other for more than 10 years or so when I was working at the Documentation Center of Cambodia. And Mr. Khet is the co-founder of the Youth for Peace in 1999. And so he has more than 10-year experience with the conflict, peace building, conflict transformation, and also transitional justice. Yes, and also he helped with young people to dealing with the memory from the survivor and also building the reconciliation program, and also community in post-conflict in Cambodia. And I'd like to add that he also got a master's degree in conflict transformation. And he's been working a lot in the past 10 years also with sustain local initiative and effort to address the legacy of memory. So today we have the honor for him to join to share the experience here and involved with peace education as well. So I will give the floor to you, Mr. Long. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Saina, for introducing me. And it's my pleasure to be part of the meeting today. Today just would like to share with you some of the work of youth peace building, focus more on that, and the concept of the community peace learning center at the mass killing sites. As Mr. Soth Plai Ngarm already mentioned, the whole concept of memories and museums in the context of Cambodia, so everyone have a broad knowledge about that. So I will focus on the work of Youth for Peace, youth focused peace building program, and the work around the communities at the memory and memorials around the communities. As Sayana mentioned, that I am one of the founding members of the Youth for Peace, and currently I'm an executive director of the Peace Institute Cambodia. And actually, Youth for Peace aim to empower young people to become an agent of peaceful social change. And we believe this in a central role of young people in building peace and social reconstruction. Youth for Peace impact the present and help to build a future generation of involved citizens, strong leaders, and good role models. We build the capacity of youth to design and implement peace-building projects, and most importantly, promote solidarity by encouraging them to do together, first by analyzing the conflict and social problems, and then identifying social and justice issue, and lastly, let them think critically, creatively, and how to cooperative efforts can help overcome barriers to justice and peace. With the creation of the extraordinary chamber in the court of Cambodia, ECCC, Youth for Peace conducted a survey on the impact of genocide in the mind of Cambodian youth in 2005. From the finding the study, we created a project called Youth for Justice and Reconciliation to educate young people about the Khmer Rouge history, about the root causes of killing, understanding ECCC process and proceedings, and the role of young people in reconciliation. Youth for Peace also link the young generation to the survivor generation to engage them in dialogue, storytelling, and truth-telling. This kind of intergenerational dialogue engage in healing process by the survivor who kept silent for more than 30 years. And I could see the need of next generation to promote reconciliation and healing process that necessary for the present time and the future peace building. After many years serving as an executive director of Youth for Peace, in 2009, I undertook a master degree in the Center for with the Center for Peace and Conflict Study, and I conducted an action research called Initiating a Way to Address a Legacy of Memory in Cambodia, aiming to explore a way to address the legacy in Cambodia. How the community create their own way to reconcile the past and revision the future to reflect the question of what next after the ECCC, and the question, what could we do to sustain the dialogues, the momentum of dialogues, because we're concerned about when the ECCC end, then no people, you know, especially young people or survivor could still talk about the past. So this is very important, you know, to generate the continuation of dialogues from this generation to another. To do this, we have to build up a legacy of past, which is meaningful for both survivor and subsequent generations. As you know, Cambodia constructed memorials and museums, especially related to the Khmer Rouge history. The purpose to commemorate the death and stimulate anger for the political gain, especially after the collapse of Khmer Rouge regime. The way of manipulating young people and using them for a battle of again another factions, you know, in the jungle. So you can understand that those memorials or stupa museum actually initiated by the state that are not the representation of the victim survivors. So they don't participate in the process at all. And my research actually created space and encourage people, especially the Khmer Rouge victim survivors, to express themselves individually and working together in collective efforts to achieve a shared vision for never again of the mass atrocity, and lesson learned for the subsequent generation to learn from those lessons. It is focused at the community of mass killing sites and the security centers, which used to be fearful, silent, and abundant, and later on has been transformed into the places for sharing, reflection, and revisioning for their communities. The process actually has involved key stakeholders, including victim survivors, religious leaders, educators, young people, to discuss the input and initiative to build a legacy of memory in a way that represent themselves and collectively meaningful. It is actually promote a history from below, the history of the people and by the people, which changes the way in which traditionally history is written, particularly in the current context of Cambodia, the victor, the one who writes history. The establishment of the Community Peace Learning Center at the mass killing site after the research process indicate the need for victim survivor healing and reconciliation. They became places for preservation, commemoration, dialogues, and truth-telling to repair relationship between former Khmer cadre, victim survivor, and the post-war generation. They enable the current and future generation to learn from the past and also provide place for sharing difficulty, grief, disappointments, experiences, and stories through the process of community consultation and dialogues. The physical community peace learning center includes memories, sites, and mass graves, and the buildings with three main rooms: the museum, the local museum, the libraries, and the dialogue room. Community Peace Learning Center actually has played important roles in contributing to memorization process, community reconciliation, with a great impact on the life of victims, changes in youth behaviors, and community resilience, which collectively confront the past and bring about positive image of communities to move forward and to leave a good legacy for the next generation to learn from and to avoid repetition of mass atrocity and human rights violation. Thank you so much for attention.
Thank you very much, Khet, for your interesting presentation and so many issues you raised. We will continue to discuss it later. And now, please, I would like to remind everyone to leave your questions on the chat or your comments, or your reflections, so we can come back to this later. Thank you again so much. And now I would like to present the next speaker. The next speaker, now we are going from Cambodia to Bangladesh, which is another very interesting country, and we are very grateful to Mofidul Hoque, who is a Bangladeshi researcher and publisher, and he's one of the founder trustees of a Bangladesh Liberation War Museum, for being with us today. And also Mofidul Hoque is the director of a Center for Study of Genocide and Justice of the museum. And he organized several international conferences on Bangladeshi genocide and justice in the past. And he also recipient of numerous awards, such as Bangla Academy Literary Award and many others for his also literary activities. So, and now I would like to give the floor to Mofidul Hoque to have a presentation to tell us about Bangladesh and about the museum and how you confront with difficult issues, but also with the issue of denial of genocide.
Thank you, Natalia. It's my great pleasure to be part of this panel. And when I was listening to our good friend Tali Nates from Johannesburg Holocaust Museum, and also two of our colleagues from Cambodia, speaking about their experience and also referring to the Cold War scenario and also the complex political background on which the very tragic genocide happened in Cambodia, and also how they are memorializing. So I think we have many similarities, and This gives us greater strength and to be part of this whole process of memorialization of the past atrocities in order to learn lessons from the past and also to link it with our present situation and crisis and to work for a better future. We from Liberation War Museum are engaged in this task, and I will dwell initially a bit about the historical background to give you a better understanding of the context where we work. So we can move to the third slide, please, Natalia. The next one and the next one, the map. I think that will give you a better idea. So this is the map of the Indian subcontinent when the British left, and they divided India into two countries, but one strange country with two green patches you can see. This became Pakistan on the basis of a religious identity. There are a lot of difference between the two wings, but the political leaders and also the colonial rulers thought that this way they will solve the Hindu-Muslim conflict. And so Pakistan emerged in 1947 with two parts separated by more than 1,000 miles and also great difference in their history, culture, economy, society. And right from the beginning, this became a colonial type of operation. The western part dominating over the eastern part, culturally, economically, politically, militarily. And the people try to uphold their own distinct cultural identity, the linguistic national identity. And our Cambodian friend has talked about the positive nationalism. I think that also can be applied in our case. So this nationalism was opposing the religious identity. We have our own religion, but when we talk about our linguistic national identity, all religion has an equal right and space. So this is how the conflict started, and it culminated in the 1971 Liberation War, the 9-month-long war, when 3 million of our people perished in the black hole of genocide. 10 million people had to leave the country and seek refuge in India. And at the end, the Pakistan army surrendered to the joint forces of India and Bangladesh Liberation Forces. So it also has a similarity with the Cambodian reality when the Cambodian resistance in collaboration with Vietnam liberated their country. So in the next slide, please. So when the country got its independence, it was a devastated land. And it was almost like ground zero in Cambodia. We also have almost like that situation. But the people were jubilant that they have ended the domination and they could build a new life. And the new government headed by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, they immediately raised the question of trial of the perpetrators of genocide. When he returned from Pakistani prison on 10 January 1972, in the first meeting, he appealed to the United Nations that they form a committee, let them come and investigate and establish a trial process. And Bangladesh also identified 195 Pakistani prisoners of war as major war criminals and called for justice for trial of the war criminals. But there was not much support for the effort that Bangladesh has taken. And in 1973, in the parliament, the International Crimes Tribunal Act was unanimously adopted, a national trial process for international crimes. But this process also not got much support from the global community, because we know that in the 1970s and 80s, the world was divided on Cold War rivalry, and the same happened with Cambodian genocide also. The perpetrators of genocide, the Khmer Rouge regime, was given the seat in the United Nations. And so there are many similarities with the scenario, and this is what was the reality in the 1970s. And in the next slide, and in 1975, a great tragedy has fallen on our nation when the leader of the liberation struggle, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was brutally murdered, and the military became part of the government, and the perpetrators also joined with them. And so it was a government which has taken a political position not supportive of the liberation war, and also not supportive of the trial, and the denial and distortion of history followed. So we can say, next slide please, that Bangladesh was really in a difficult scenario, and globally it was an era of inaction for justice for genocide. As I said, Cold War rivalry divided the world, and the Bangladesh genocide, which happened before the wide eyes of the world, gradually became a forgotten genocide. And globally, it was the such scenario, and nationally also, because of the political change, it became the same. And Bangladesh genocide, a forgotten genocide for the world community also. So this found reflection in many ways. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that when academics and those who are concerned with history, they discuss about genocide from Holocaust, they come to the 1990s, to the genocide that happened in Bosnia or in Serbia, in the former Yugoslavia, the Rwandan genocide. But recently, they are trying to also highlight Cambodian genocide, but we found that in very few cases, the Bangladesh genocide is mentioned. Also, in the major works also, we will find that there is little or no reference of Bangladesh genocide. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, what we have to fight against, that you cannot forget, you cannot be selective about the history of genocide, that you will highlight some genocide and you will forget some genocide. So this is, I think, the reality of Bangladesh genocide, which we feel very strongly as a victim nation, that we have to fight not only against distortion, but also denial by choice or by amnesia, or whatever way you term it. So the next slide, please. So as this scenario continued, we found that in our nation, we have another kind of vibrancy. The victims never allowed for the society or to forget what happened in the past, and also never allowed their right to justice to be forfeited. So there was a undercurrent. There was many ways that that the people started their memorialization, maybe in a small way, in a humble way, in a small at the community level, and also in many artistic way, especially writing memoirs, which also made a big impact on the society. And in 1991, there was a People's Tribunal that was established, led by a martyr's mother. She called for justice and truth. And there was people rallied behind her in a very strong way, with the younger generation also. And this has made a big impact on the society. Next slide, please. So the tribunal, People's Tribunal, held a public hearing. Here also we have a similarity with what happened in Cambodia immediately after the liberation from Khmer rule. But in our case, it was a massive social movement, and it has made a very big impact. So the Liberation War Museum was established in 1996, 25 years after the event happened. And we felt that there was no major effort being made to memorialize the past atrocity and take the lessons from the past, and also highlight the Bangladesh genocide. So we 8 friends, 8 trustees, decided that we will try to take up the cause on behalf of the society, on behalf of the community. And we rented an old colonial house and asked for the community help to build a museum. The next slide, please. So this is how the museum started its journey. It's a small place, and we have converted the rooms into galleries in the 2 floors. And in the backyard, we have a space for different kind of activity. And right from the beginning, even before we have opened our doors, we were overwhelmed by the support we got from the community. And that is the strength of this museum, and that is how the museum can initiate many programs, and also many people extended their cooperation to the museum. So next slide, please. And the experience that we have learned is that this private initiative, the private museum, it became a people's institution with the love and cooperation of people from every walks of life, and also the younger generation. It has very strong community support. And also we got enriched with contribution from many people with old documents, newspaper clippings, other photographs or other documents of atrocities. And we have enriched our archive, and we could also expand our activities. So in the slides, I will just show one by one a different kind of activities. We have many activities. So next slide, please. And the backyard became a place for many cultural acts. And next slide. And also many kind of, it's the children painting competition. Next one, we observe Hiroshima Day every year. Next one. And also we have a huge festival annually. We call it Freedom Festival. We invite all the students to visit the museum in 1 year. It happens in a big field. And this is also a great event, which we cannot hold for last 2-3 years due to COVID. And also next slide, we have added with our museum one mobile museum, which goes to distant places, to the different educational institutions. And now we added an appeal with that, that students are greatly inspired when they see the museum. And we ask them to interview senior members in their family about their experience in 1971. So this appeal has brought us great result, and teachers are also part of this effort. We call them volunteer network teachers. And so far we have more than 60,000 plus eyewitness accounts submitted by the young students. So the next slide, we have the list of those who submit their eyewitness accounts, and also we have the archive for all those accounts. And we've also got connected with the global community, the community of museums, of memorials, of justice activists, and that also gave us a greater strength. I will show a few slides. Next slide, please. Which is, oh sorry, I will just explain that we excavated one killing field at that time it was in the suburb of the city, but now it is within the city. But it was an abandoned pump house where people were taken and slaughtered and dumped into the abandoned pit full of water. Then after independence, it was excavated, and we re-excavated it in 1999 and found many skulls like in the Cambodian killing fields. And we have organized a memorial site. And in that site, we also have given a wall to the genocide of the 20th century. It starts with Armenian genocide, but now we think we have to include Hebedo, Namibian genocide also here. Then it goes to Holocaust, and we also mentioned different concentration camps, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and others, and also the number of people perished in the Holocaust, and also the other genocide ending in Sudan at that time, and also at the end we wrote that it is continuing. So this site has become a very strong memorial site, not only a particular killing field, but it encompasses the other killing fields in the country and also other sites of atrocity. So next slide, please. So these type of activities has given us, no, I think we missed the other slide. Can you check, Natalia? Yes, previous one. Previous one. The one with victim moment standing in a line. Yeah, this one. Yes, yes. No. Next. Next one. Yes. So this is a public hearing which happened in Cambodia, the previous one on victims of sexual violence, where the victims came from Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Nepal, and also from Bangladesh. So such acts of solidarity and also bringing the victims and survivors together can have a great impact on the issue itself and also on society. And next slide, please. And we also organize different international conference, and this year in December, we'll be holding our 7th international conference. And the next one, this global connectivity has given us many links. We are working with Asia Justice and Rights on about working in the Rohingya camp. And next slide. And when in 2017, the Rohingya genocide erupted, the Rohingya, this one I also like to mention that we annually organize a festival of documentary films on human rights and liberation. And 3 years ago, we have a film, a VR, a virtual reality film, which was given to us by Shoah Foundation. And we organized a special screening for the VR about a survivor going back to Auschwitz concentration camp. So this kind of activities link us with the global effort. And we can also say that we have good contact with Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam, and we are also doing exhibition in collaboration with them. And next one. So such kind of activities has given us great strength and also hope in the future, and hope that we can highlight the Bangladesh genocide more strongly, and it will get more and more recognized. We are happy to note that now in many ways, Bangladesh genocide is getting recognized, and this panel is also a reflection of that. And we hope that you will also take the message in your own institution, in your own work, and put Bangladesh genocide back into the map of the global genocide. This is our young volunteers working with the Rohingya victims. And this has also given us an opportunity to highlight both Bangladesh genocide and Rohingya genocide. We as a victim nation have given shelter to 1 million Rohingya refugees, and we are trying to stand with them. So these are some of the work. And if you say that what is the difficult challenge, I will say that we want to have more strong alliance with the global community. And also within the country, the intolerance, especially religious intolerance, is on the rise. And we think that we have to take the strong lessons from the past, that religious intolerance has resulted into Bangladesh genocide. And we cannot allow such hate campaign and intolerance in a society, in a post-conflict society. And also Rohingya genocide is also linked with the religious intolerance. And this is in the rise in the whole region. So hate campaign, intolerance, and violence based on religious identity, we have to confront that very strongly. So we have many challenges, many difficulties, but we think that memory has a great strength and great power. And when memorialization is connected with the community, we always feel that that creates a new opportunity. And memorialization always has a diversity, and memorialization with the support of the victims and community can move forward. And this is how we are going forward. Next slide, please. And we also happy to announce that in 2017, we got a piece of land, and then we constructed our new permanent museum. It was a museum which was beyond our dream, but it has become possible. Now we have many facilities which we are ready to offer to our friends from abroad, from the region, and we want to work hand in hand. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your very rich and meaningful presentation. I can only sign any of your words that until victims of the genocides don't have faces and their own voices, we will face another tragedies every day. So we need to reflect on it and fight the distortion of the memory. And now I want to welcome to the floor my colleague Anastasia Deka, who is also working in Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center, and she is a touring guide in GULAG History Museum, and now she will tell you a bit about our challenges. Ася?
Hello, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for introduction, Alona, into different museums in Moscow, and I will make a short review of the programs of these two museums. Well, Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center in Moscow, it works with several rather complicated topics. First, it is Jewish history in Russia. Jews in Russia always dealt with distrust, suspicions, stereotypes, and of course, anti-Semitism. Russia is basically a Christian country, and the Russian emperors put a lot of effort into converting Jews to the Christian faith. And our guided tours of the museum include dialogues about peculiarities of Jewish life among Christians or among Muslims. And we emphasize that Russia has always been and remains a multinational country. It is a very important topic for all of us. And second, we have several guided tours for adults and school children dedicated to the history of Holocaust. During the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, more than 2.5 million of Jews were killed in the territories of the Soviet Union. And these guided tours are not just historical overview. We try to make a discussion with participants, with our visitors about the causes and the consequences of these genocides. And well, sometimes we talk about other genocides that happened all over the world. And it is very important for us to emphasize that everything that happened wasn't just the responsibility of Nazi army, and a lot of locals helped Nazis. So here we deal with the phenomena of collaborationism and general indifference. And sometimes we deal with some difficult questions, because a lot of people just don't believe in collaboration. A lot of people, and well, the second museum where I work is the GULAG History Museum. So GULAG is a Russian abbreviation that means Chief Administration of Labor Camps. It refers to the period from 1930 till 1960 in the USSR. And during the existence of the GULAG system, about 20 million people passed through this camp system, labor camp system, and most of these people were accused unfairly. Basically, it deals, this exposition deals with the history of political repressions in the USSR. And again, we emphasize during our guided tours that basic human rights in the USSR were declared in the constitution, but they were violated very often. And this history of the GULAG and history of political repressions in Russia nowadays is still a complicated topic, since the crimes of Stalin's era were not recognized as the crimes at the state level. And the officials who executed the repressions were not punished, and not all of the victims of repressions have been rehabilitated. Only 6.5 million of victims were rehabilitated. And again, during the guided tours in the GULAG History Museum, we work with some topical myths connected with this history. First of all, the most typical one is the myth that it can't be that a person accused hasn't committed some kind of crime, because state security officers does not deal with innocence. And this is the basic problem, the problem of innocence, the problem of accusation, of sentence, of, well, everything that is connected with this topic. And the second very typical myth about political repressions is that Stalin was deceived by his officials, his subordinates, and he didn't know what was happening in the country. And again, as I said, a lot of officials, they were not punished. And we also may say that crimes of the Stalin's era and crimes of Stalin himself, they were not considered to be crimes in modern Russia. And we work a lot with different stereotypes, different myths about this period of history. And for me, I'm a historian, and for me, the work in these two museums is a great experience of working with the audience that has some stereotypes, that has a lot of different thoughts about the topic, and I'm trying to mix different methods that I use in the Jewish Museum. I'm trying to use them also in the GULAG Museum, because this topic, they might seem the opposite, because they deal with, well, Holocaust. It is the problem of dealing with the other, and political repressions in the USSR were political repressions among the citizens of the country, but still it might seem the same, and the problem that I deal with are mostly the same, because a lot of people who might seem the supporters of Stalinism, they might be also supporters of different types of genocide, because they might think that people deserve genocides because of their peculiarities of the culture, and they might deserve genocide because of their crimes, I don't know. And every time, well, I can say that that every my guided tour deals with the stereotypes and myths and so on, but I work with it very often, and typical problems are the same in these two museums, because people do not have the basic understanding of the concept of tolerance. And as I said, Russia is a multinational country, and it is very difficult to realize that people of different cultures have to live in peace, and they should have equal rights in the country, and their mother tongues should have different equal rights in the country, and so on. And for me, as I said, it's very important to use my experience in this discussion. And our museum, it is divided into two parts. So it is a Jewish museum that is dedicated to the Jewish history. And we have also a tolerance center that is an educational center that deals with different programs for school children that are dedicated to the human rights and equality of people of different abilities, and programs that tells to the school children about multinationality of our country. And for us, it is very important not just to talk about tolerance, but to explain how to live in the country of tolerance, how to live in this multinational country. And I hope that our work and my work as a guide helps the adults and the school children to realize the complication of this topic. So thank you. I think that's I finished.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. I think it was very important to share your own experience on the ground, because you are working in these two different museums, but challenges can be similar. So it was very interesting to learn, and I think it's also a topic for the next very extensive discussion. So thank you very much for sharing with us. And we have quite a few questions in our chat from our participants from Cambodia, from Myanmar. But before going to our discussion, I would like also to ask our presenters to come back again. And I have one question to you. Some of you already mentioned, referred to this, but if you can ask very briefly, respond to this question. How do your museum, your educators, guides, deal with distortion? For example, the challenges when the visitors come and they say that the relevancy of a Holocaust today or other atrocities you are dealing with are not relevant. But it happened, it was already history, and it won't be back. For example, with Hitler or Pol Pot, and both, and also transfer the guilt to say that it's Hitler and only Pol Pot is guilty for this and responsible. And how do you address when visitors make simple comparison and say that things are happening today exactly what happened, not also exactly it happened in the 30s or in the 40s, depending on regional or historical context you are working with. So this is a very complex question. So in fact, two questions, but I would like to learn your opinion about this. So maybe we can start from Tali, if possible.
Sure. It's a very complicated question, and maybe a very multi-layered, and of course we need a long time to speak about it. So I just chose a few things to highlight. First of all, I think preparation of staff, volunteers, those that are working in the museum is essential. So really good, Q&A, just collect questions and form a good answer, but everyone has the same kind of information. That is really important, that people will not come from different angles, because you have 10 people working there and 20 volunteers, and each one is saying their own opinion rather than the mission, the vision, the way the museum is represented. This is really, really important. I want to speak a little bit about analogies, because that is, I think, for me, the most important part of your question, Natalia. So this one is exactly like this one. Look at that, it's exactly like Kristallnacht. Or look at this, it's exactly, the refugees now, it's exactly like the refugees then, or things like that. It's not a bad thing. Analogies are not bad. I mean, we historians all the time to do comparisons. That is not a bad thing as a starter, but there are pitfalls. There are things that you don't do. This is exactly like this one, because history you have to analyze. So I think what is really important is to look at case by case. I will invite the listeners to, we did a lot on our website, a lot on our YouTube, a lot on our podcast series. For example, we do a podcast series with scholars that are looking at the topic of we call it sleepwalking through the assault on democracy. So what is happening today that is having sort of shadows or shades of the past? What do you see today that, you know, is pointing sort of a red light on different issues? So for example, the first podcast that we did was about dangerous speech, and how if you recognize the warning signs of dangerous speech, and you can speak about genocide in the past, but, you know, and talk about dangerous speech today, this can be helpful. So propaganda today, fake news today, you know, this can be helpful. So I would not say don't do it. Certainly do it. History is there as an entry point for us to look at ourselves, to reflect on ourselves, but don't give easy answers. It was not all Pol Pot. It was not all Hitler, you know, so give complicated answers to simplified questions. So again, it's a very difficult question, very multi-layered questions, but I think just don't allow the simplicity. History is complicated. Treat it with respect, give full answers, but for that, you have to train your staff, you have to prepare the resources, and you need to know the history at the museum.
Thank you very much, Tali, for your response. Very good. And the next, I would like to ask, if possible, Mofidul Hoque. Please unmute. Okay, now it's fine.
Yeah. We are in a different scenario, in different context, in different parts, but I think there are many things in common about what happened in the past and what is the lesson and what are the threats and what are the complexities of today. I think most important part is how we can reach out to the new generation, those who have no direct experience of the past atrocities and who are now majority of our population, and also the complex national and global scenario. And here, the most difficult challenge is how we can confront intolerance based on religious identity or national identity or any kind of group identity, and also branding other groups as an enemy of national interest or religious interest. And in our case, we in the subcontinent, we have gone through so many bloodshed and riots and conflicts based on the religious identity. And Bangladesh emerged upholding the national linguistic identity, where they proclaimed that we may be Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, or Hindus, but we are all Bengali. But this value, we think, is the core value of our struggle. But there are erosion and also the global rise of various kind of religious extremism, xenophobia. These are creating a big impact on our society also. So for us, it is history for which we struggled very hard to establish our place and right in history. And we also made great emphasis on the issue of justice and truth. And as I said, that in 1973, we have adopted International Crimes Tribunal Act, but we could not do the trial. But after almost 40 years, with a reversal, with the more awareness among the young people also, the mandate was given, and from 2010, we have established the tribunal, and the tribunal is completing the major trial for the major criminals, for the domestic collaborators. But the major Pakistani collaborators are out of our reach. But anyway, this justice process has actually given a verdict about the past history. And we think that we have to take advantage of this. We could not do that much. and also to work in education, especially in the curriculum where tolerance should be very much part of the education. And we also want to learn from others, from Tolerance Center or from in other places, how one can bring up the new generation with the spirit of respect for diversity, respect for otherness of other people, and also be tolerant to the multiple diverse world around them. So these are the major challenges. We do not have ready-made solution in our hand, but we think that history has given us some example and lessons. We have to move forward with it, and we have to also create a great human bondage. So the situation is very difficult, and also the hate campaign in social media. This has become a great problem, and this is going on in almost they enjoy impunity, those who are engaged in it, in the name of religion mostly. So how to tackle that, and in the digital platform, how to build up a counter narrative or the major narrative based on history. So we are facing this challenge, and also we are a bit worried about the fragile political scenario. Now we have a very big museum, and we have to depend on government support, but we are not sure with the change of regime what may happen next time. And we follow with interest what is happening in Poland also. We think that museums should work for self-sufficiency, should have more support from the community, and be free from the government interference. So a lot of challenges we have, and we are continuing our struggle.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to ask Soth Plai Ngarm to respond.
Thank you for the question. Actually, if we will believe in the theories that peace is a process, I think we can answer this question by one, we not rely to war in order to find peace. We don't need to rely to or waiting for something worse to get something better, to find something better. And so that's why we have to do it as part of the process, because if it's not relevant, we have to explain why we have to wait until it's relevant. We have to do it because we cannot, have peace and then sit on it forever. We have to continue doing it. If it's relevant, it's happening now. The answer is why we have to do it. But also we have to understand that this question, it cannot be answered by the museum itself. Museum just part of many other things. But if we also have to recognize the positive thing that happened to human throughout the human history as well. If we look at the throughout history, when during the Roman and Greek time, I doubt there's no genocide happening during that time, but it wasn't recorded because there's no social media right now. I think the good thing that also happened to us, that things are being observed precisely everywhere, because we can see that when the psychopath will restrain their behavior when they're being observed, and so this kind of things that we also see that it's important that we have to do it, and we have to explain that we don't wait until genocide happen again that we have to do it, or we don't have to learn from what had happened to us before. The point that I want to make is we have to develop the peace cognitive in human being. Like the guilt, the punish the guilt, all that kind is more we have to do, but also how can a human being be sensitive with the behavior the abuse that they commit. If we train our children from the early age to be hygiene, they wouldn't throw rubbish into the ground. They would feel difficult to do that. Not when killing somebody. That is very important that we have to build that. If we believe in civilization, I think we come so fast now to recognize the role of women or that kind of thing. It's a part of the process, and that I so positive that we are part of the process. As a museum, we play a role, but we're not the answer to those questions that we pose.
Thank you, and Khet Long.
Thank you. I just like to respond to the question on the chart, right? Regarding the
Now we have this first round of questions which we asked everyone, and it is about distortion in different ways, how people make analogies or distort different facts. I can repeat the question again.
Yeah, please.
So so the question was, how do museums, educators and guides deals with distortion? For example, with such distortion when visitors see the relevancy of Holocaust or other atrocities you are dealing with are not relevant, and or say it happened some time ago, so it's not actual today. And also when we're talking about responsibility, for example, transfer of guilt, transfer of responsibility to say that this is only Hitler or this is only Pol Pot do it. And how do you address these kind of challenges?
Yeah, I think the speaker above described clearly and in detail. Yeah, and I think just in general, museum play important role in educating visitors, especially young generation. Just to learn from what happened and to avoid, the wrongdoing and the past atrocity. So if we do not learn history, if we do not follow the right memories, then there are a lot of conflict happening in the society. For example, in the context of Cambodia, the conflict of different historical narrative, that like the victors trying to control the history, control the narrative. For example, the conflict of liberation and the invasion of the Vietnamese into Cambodia. So still a lot of controversy on that conflict, narrative of conflict. So things like that, very important. And then the museum play the role to really bring the truth about, what could be the positive narrative, used for the young generation. Yeah, because otherwise, when they visit museum and then they come back with a different narrative, different story, then again create a lot of problem in the future. So that's very important of the museum, to be enthusiastic and to be truth about the facts and what's happening. So it's not introducing the concept of victors, control the history, control the narrative. So that create a lot of problem in the future. As in Cambodia, for example, the education on history of Khmer Rouge is still very, very surface, like in a surface level. It's more on sufferings and how people, kill and like that. It's not go beyond the facts, but like to go to understand the root causes of the genocide, because it's more political here when we talk about histories of Khmer Rouge. Yeah, so that's why I think especially the role of community museum, could work different direction from the state-driven museum, which they control the history, the narratives. So the local museum maybe work closely with the victim. It's a story of the victim and history of the people, which they could represent. The different story should be respected and good for the young generation to learn from that. So that's my idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the last speaker, Anastasia Deka.
Thank you, Natalia, for this question. And well, I should say that during our guided tours, we talk a lot about collective responsibility for what is happening. And we talk a lot about responsibility for the things that happen in our country that are connected with the government. And we talk about responsibility for having different stereotypes against people from different cultures. And for example, well, Russia as a former empire is facing the consequence of being the empire. And nowadays, there isn't any state anti-Semitism in Russia, but still we have a lot of problems with the stereotypes against the migrant workers from Central Asia, because they come to Russia because countries of Central Asia were the part of the Soviet Union and the part of the Russian Empire, and that's why they go to the metropole. And people in Russia nowadays have a lot of stereotypes against these migrant workers. And sometimes when we discuss Holocaust and people are just think that it is a part of some, I don't know, ancient story. And I'm just asking them to imagine the situation when a genocide of migrants from Central Asia is taking place. And when I'm trying to imagine the situation and ask people to imagine it, a lot of them, they just stop feeling sympathy. And they have a lot of doubts against injustice of what might happen, because they have a lot of stereotypes. And that's why we talk that this problem of genocide, of the possibility of genocide, is, well, it exists in Russia and it exists in other different countries. And for us, it's very important to emphasize that Holocaust or other genocides are not the history. They are something that might happen again. And only we, and for example, our school children, our young generation, are responsible for our future. And we're trying to work with different stereotypes and different myths that are connected with the genocides and, for example, myth about Holocaust. And we're trying to show the well, all of the consequences of this genocide. because, well, it is a horrible situation, and the stereotypes that might lead to the genocides are very horrible too. And so we are trying to talk, to discuss this imaginary situation, and that might be, well, that might not happen in the future when we talk about it.
Thank you very much, Asha and everyone. So we, all of us who are working at the museums, at memorial sites, or with memory, it's also our responsibility, and we know how it's challenging, yes, to work with visitors, with different audiences, to deal with all this kind of distortions happening. And I see that we don't have so much time left, but we have some questions in the chat, and these are questions from Esther from Myanmar and from Visal from Cambodia, and also from one more question from Laura Chan. So, and if someone would like to ask question directly, please raise your hand. Otherwise, maybe Sayana, who is monitoring our chat, can read it.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And I would like our speaker to stay with us. It's interesting discussion, and we have some questions in the chat as well. So the speaker have to answer to share the question to this. So at first we have this from Laura Chan. Would you like to ask, or just raise your hand, or I will read the question to our speaker. So this one, it might be referred to all the speaker, doesn't specific. It's about the role of the museum. The role of museum when the country which committed like genocide, and how when the genocide happened and the country denied, and also in the case of like in Turkey and Armenia, sorry, not Turkish, Turk and government denied the Armenian genocide, and also like the genocide that denied by the government of the country and Rwanda. And so this would be the speaker that with experience with the museum would like to share. And maybe we start with Tali first.
Sure,
Thank
it's
you.
very good. It's a very good question, Laura, because you know, the museum, as I started my speech, I said museums are trusted to tell the truth. And Asya, I especially think about the role of a museum in Russia, but also in Turkey or in other countries, of what do you do when the national narrative is changing? What do you do when, for example, under the Soviet Union, Jews were not recognized as the victims? It was the Hitlerites that were the victims of Hitler in one, but there was no recognition of the actual victim. I think this is a good example, because you see still those memorials all over in Poland, in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, in Russia, and so on. So how do you as a museum actually still tell the historic truth? In other words, not a political truth, not according to the government truth, but a historical truth. And it's not easy for a state museum. I think Khet Long exactly spoke about it. A national museum that gets the funding from the country find it very difficult to tell any other narrative than the national narrative. So how do you do it? National museums do find ways of maybe telling a more critical truth, but it is easier for the independent museums. Independent NGOs or independent museums find it easier. And if I can take an example of, for example, in Turkey, many scholars at universities or at communities do research the issue of what happened during the First World War, even though it is not the national narrative of the country. So it is an excellent question. And it is a call actually for museums to, as I started and I said, you know, be wise about it, Don't abuse your role as a museum as a place of trust, and ask the right question. Be critical for the narrative that you are telling.
Sorry. Thank you, Tali. Could you hear me well? Because I didn't hear it. Sorry. Yes, thank you, Tali. It is a very interesting question, and what you mentioned is not only like the state, the government, but also the individual also have. And I would like to know if other speaker would like to say on this as well. Maybe Mr. Hoque. And maybe I pronounce the name is correct or not. Mr. Mofidul Hoque would like to share about the museum, the role of museum in this question. Or maybe next first, maybe Mr. Ngarm.
I think this one is very good and very difficult questions. That's why sometimes we have to expand the definition of museum. I would also the human museum also can play an important role, because we have to also consider that the political and social pressure when you create the museum that not contradict, it opposite to the nation's politic, or the nation for the contradict to the nationalism. It's hard to have a museum when have the museum approved by the government to establish that kind of museum that you question yourself. I've been visiting many museums, like I went to Japan. The museum that displays there is more about bombing, but it's not about how the Japanese soldier did to other nations. And almost similarly to other nations as well, you cannot do that, because it's not because the government wanted. Sometimes the government in trouble to allow that, because the population would challenge it, because they don't like to be humiliated by the history. And that's why the human museum is important, that people can write in the book, people can tell the story, and that memories inside the person, which is not displayed. Whenever possible, it should come out. For example, like if the Turkish story can be displayed somewhere else, in Germany, in some other country, that will have a reserve that kind of memory, and people can learn from that story. But that's a problem also. I have to consider the political and social challenge in the context.
Thank you, Mr. Ngarm. I like to call Mr. Ngarm now, and it's interesting the answer, like to go through this, to deal with all this, and it start with the individual, just like yourself, your organization as well, the gallery. It's nice. And Laura, if you like to add, or you want to add something or continue, you can raise your hand. And also, because of the time, maybe Anastasia, you'd like to add or no? Would you like to say on this too?
Yes, thank you. Well, I should say that people often look for answers in museums, because they just they trust museums. But well, we, for example, in the GULAG History Museum, some people come to this museum to hear that Joseph Stalin was a monster. But we cannot call him a monster, because, for example, well, our state doesn't call him so. and we don't have any rights to call him a monster. And for us, the only possibility is showing people the facts and giving them a historical overview and giving them the opportunity to be critical of what they hear. So this is the only possibility for the museums to be clear in such complicated topics, I believe so.
Yeah, thank you, Asia or Stasia. Because of the time now, we would like to have a few more questions from the chat. And I would like our speaker to stay with us and maybe just answer briefly to the question. And welcome back, Mr. Mofidul. I see you disconnected because maybe the internet, the network or something. And now let's start with the other two questions to Mr. Long and also to Mr. Ngarm. There's a question from Asia. She would like to know about the challenge, the key challenge that related with the international generalization and reconciliation. How is the process go with all this, the challenge? How would you deal with the challenge of reconciliation dialogue and the process of reconciliation as well? That's the first question. And also another question is about the victim, the survivor of the Khmer Rouge member, which are still in trauma, and could we deal with this as well? It's sub question to the first one. So so this question are to Mr. Long and Mr. Ngarm. So I would like to start with Mr. Long first.
Thank you, Saina, and that's a very interesting question. And we work so far on the intergenerational dialogue or generational reconciliation. Of course, there are a lot of challenges. As you know, the context of Khmer Rouge, especially victim survivors, you know, they are not easy to speak out, you know, what they experience, because first of all, it is political. Secondly, it's too painful for them to speak out. And thirdly, the children, grandchildren, you know, they don't believe what happened, you know. And last but not least, the poverty. They are, you know, they have to work hard to be busy at their own, you know, to survive. So they don't have time to really, you know, tell the stories about that. However, we have been working hard to really create safe space for both generations to talk together, because we believe that, you know, the space, the conversation between the two generations actually bring a lot of healings and reconciliation. It's part of the process, you know, when the survivor see the young generation carefully listen to the story, they really want to tell more, you know. And while they tell the story, it's part of the healing, because they have space to tell what the suffer, to tell the pain, you know, they had in the past. But we have a lot of different techniques. For example, art therapies, you know, we have time for the survivor to just draw an object that they remember most, you know, even though they cannot, you know, have skill in drawing, but the young people, you know, could help draw and they can tell a story. It's part of that. So and after storytelling process, after part of therapy, they can work together, to really go beyond the individual story, but more on cultural context. For example, they bring or organize some offering to the monks, so let them offer some of the reducing suffering, like an ritual of the monk, giving chanting or water ceremony, for example, is part of the suffering or reducing suffering from after works for one day or together with the young generation. So it's a part of the process, and actually it effective. It is effective, and the survivor who participate in the program actually giving a lot of good feelings and release a lot of pains, and they well participate, and they are happy actually to tell the story to the young generation. Yeah, could briefly speak about it.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Now start with Mr. Ngarm. So I just like to give the brief because of the time. Could you give just a brief to the answer? Thank you.
Hi, Esther. Thanks for your question. I think the challenge for the intergenerational reconciliation, my definition of intergenerational reconciliation a little bit different from Khet. For me, it's more about the old generation experience will have to be reconciled by the young generation, which is no experience. Even though they probably have some transfer trauma, but it's not have the same degree as the older generation. But they have to reconcile it in order to have a collective histories that they can move on. I mean, the whole society can move on, and it to do with also the understanding of the history. For example, like before you say about it's bad, the genocide is bad, but we have to ask questions like who's Khmer Rouge, where they come from. If you look at the history, there's something there that created the Khmer Rouge. Many young people in Cambodia may not know that the word we say every day, I am, is a slave. It means slave. Khnyom is slave. I am your slave. Why it create like that? It come like that because the sexual violence that happening along. People love the king, but they've been exploited by those who are around the king, and that's why we look at the economic history, the way that Cambodia live and grow, live and store their food and the farming. That you can see how all people become slaves. They all go into that because of that kind of structure that we gone through, and that's why we want to teach young people to ask that question: where Khmer Rouge come from? All this like pain, suffering that go before that. That's how they can be manipulated politically to support the Pol Pot and yeah. Sorry, I will take long.
No, it's okay. Just to connect to this question by Vishal, could you give very brief just to answer to Vishal about the positive nationalism? How could you contribute positive nationalism to peace building?
I think it's very important that we have that positive nationalism, because when society went through that atrocity and trauma, there a lot to do with the impact of the esteem, self-esteem. There's a contrast between the positive nationalism and the destructive. So a lot of things that because of the self-esteem, that's why we see others more magical, like Vietnam, all powerful, and then because we're angry at Vietnam and we attack the innocent people on the street. And also we think that Thai was more powerful than us, and then we go and burn the Thai embassy and we have to pay 50 million when we still depend on the aid assistance. And it come to me it more about my theory. You probably don't hear about that because I wrote in my thesis called Great Selfish. In Cambodian culture, we grow up, most of Cambodian are Buddhist, and selfish in Cambodian is a sin because you think about themselves. But for me, I would argue that if you have greater selfish and you become better. First of all, it's more kind of intuitive, natural, that you can learn from your experience. For example, like if in the family, if selfish for yourself, your sibling will suffer. If you're selfish for your family, your neighbor will suffer. If you're selfish for your nation and the other will suffer, you want to have to make the difference between whether you want yourself to be seen as a good people. For example, right now we create, I think every one of us practice great selfish because we do something more than ourselves. Like we want to tell our young people to look at our new positive experience that we will support from the international communities. Right now, we contribute back. We send people to become a peace keeper with the UN, help the rest of the world, and we use our experience from our suffering with the landmine, and from the landmine that we suffered, many people died. We have skill. Cambodian is one of the best deminers in the world, and we have that. Now, I'm not saying because I'm biased, but I read on the news that report by the UN that Cambodian deminer is one of the best, and so that's what I mean. Greater selfish, the greater you are selfish, the better you are. You want your country, you want your community be seen as a good people, as a one that you have to know that sometimes you don't need to starve yourself, but you need to know that when it's enough for you to share with others. Sorry, a bit long.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our speaker and Mr. Ngarm. Actually, it's a very interesting question, but I like to discuss more about even because of the time. And Vishal, I hope answer your question. Otherwise, we have more next event to next series for. I hope you join and discuss with us more. Actually, very, very interesting with all the very interesting speaker from different countries, and there are some questions for Tali, for other speakers as well, but so sorry. And thank you very much for your time, and I would like to give the floor to our moderator, Alina. Yeah, thank you so much, and just Alina, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to underline our beautiful discussion because so many different stories from all the parts which we got introduced. You know, I'm quite sure that half of the stories are very new to our audience. And so I think that it's very understandable that our museums, our projects are dealing with very different, but at the same time, very common challenges, because any museum, historical museum, any exhibition, it's believed to be, you know, like truth, People come to museum to understand something. And of course, there is no one truth in this world. And so any museum worker has to deal with this problem, how to not to lie, and at the same time how to deal with all these awful questions that we have from our history, and how to avoid distortion of this history, to avoid different lies which come from the time and from generation to generation. We all collect a number of stereotypes. So thank you all. I hope for the next discussion, maybe with some other speakers who couldn't join us today,